back to Secret Weapons. My name's Mark Johnson. Now, if this is your first time here, this is a YouTube channel where we do gear demos and reviews, as well as studio tips and tricks for leveling up your writing, playing, and production from the perspective of a guitar player working out of a home studio. If that's the kind of thing that could appeal to you, I would love it if you hit that subscribe button and stick around for future videos. Today we're taking a look at The Violet by JHS. If we're being honest, about half the reason I'm doing this video is as the long play to get invited on the JHS show next year, so guys, you've got my email. Joking aside, when I first heard about this overdrive, I was really curious and excited to check it out. I think JHS has a really strong track record on two specific things in my mind. I think they're good at a lot of things, but I think they have a really strong track record on two specific things. Thing number one is, I think they do not get enough credit for how good they are at designing dirt pedals. Whether it is the high concept stuff like the Rat Pack and the Muffaletta, which to this day I maintain is one of my favorite muff fuzz pedals I've ever played in my entire life. Or the similarly high concept Color Box, which is maybe, in my opinion, one of the best pedal ideas of the last decade. I need to buy one like immediately with the new reissues. It looks phenomenal. I think that JHS does drive really well. And I also think when you look at things like the Artificial Blonde and some of the signature overdrives they've done over the years, I think JHS also collaborates really, really well. And this new signature pedal between JHS and Larry Basilio is a great example of kind of the meeting of the minds, creating something really uniquely special. And I especially like that because it's a pretty straightforward workflow. And when it comes to overdrives and distortions, I like something that is easy to dial in, but has a lot of flexibility. So let's talk about what the Violet is. The Violet is a hard clipping overdrive and distortion with volume and gain, as well as a 3-band EQ with a variable mid-band, but with a twist that we will circle back to. The gain structure on here really hits me exactly where I want it to. About 9 o'clock on the gain, just below 9 even, doesn't cut the body out of your tone, but gives you access to some really great, highly touch responsive overdrive and almost clean boosty sounds. The kind of thing that when you lean into your chord gives you a lot of dirt and menace and presence and body, but also you can really dial back with your playing and get really glassy, sparkly cleans in a way that I just found to be really, I mean, you heard it on that intro track. There's a lot of responsiveness to that in a way that I really love. North of 9 o'clock, you get into that very hard clipping style of overdrive and distortion. Things get very gritty and explosive the further up you climb on that. And that volume in turn can either give your amp some breathing room or can kind of stack with the gain itself to create a very punishing experience for your amp. A lot of kind of like almost chugging quality can be found in here, especially with that EQ, and just a lot of really great rock rhythm and lead tones. And I think specifically one of the things that I love is the kind of thing that you can dial this up so that you can switch between chords and single notes without either being too woolly on the chords or too thin on the leads, which is a thing I struggle with a lot of overdrives, especially when I'm trying to use them without other gain staging or compression. So even just at that volume and gain point, you have a really great and pretty wide, flexible range of gain tones that are usable from very low to very high in this thing. But the secret sauce is in the EQ with a twist. You have your bass and your treble EQ controls, and those are what are called post-emphasis EQ, or beyond the kind of clipping stage in the Violet, which basically means your input signal goes into the pedal through the clipping stage set by the gain, and then into your high and low controls after the fact, which means your high and low controls are shaping an already distorted tone. They do not feed into the gain stage itself, and instead are more of a post-EQ process for fine-tuning the sound you want. Conversely, the mid-range is a variable control. You have the mid-frequency selectable on the top row, and then you can boost or cut that mid-frequency in the bottom row center control right there. And that is pre-emphasis, or in between the input stage of the pedal and the clipping stage itself. And there's a couple consequences there, and they're very cool. Consequence number one is that mid control will also basically additionally gain stage inside the device itself. You can get more overall distortion out of this box by pushing that mid-range up, because now your guitar is not only hitting that clipping stage, but it's also being EQ'd to be louder ahead of that clipping stage. So it can be thought of as almost like an additional boost in between the input buffer stage and the clipping itself. But the other really great benefit there is because you are hitting a specific frequency on that kind of like variable mid-range, you can create everything from blues breakery. I think JHS would say that there is a Morning Glory killer sound in here, but also you can create things like very tube screamery tones by fine-tuning the mid-range that you are seeking to push forward, and they can be set as a subtle mid boost or a pretty nasal, kind of very forward-facing mid-range boost that can give you both, like I said, a lot more gain, but also a very focused version of gain where you are clipping a specific mid frequency more than you are clipping the rest of your signal. But conversely, we talk about that like down right at or right below 9 on the gain stage, and that giving you this really wonderful touch responsive ability to get kind of a crackling amount of overdrive, but being able to dial it back into more clarity. Because that mid-range is pre-emphasis, you can also scoop some mids out ahead of your clipping stage and get even more clean headroom in this pedal, even less overdrive, even more of a focused amount of sparkle in those low gain settings. By scooping something like a low mid frequency, you can have it so that like your high notes have more breathing room in that clipping stage without low frequencies kind of building up to create more distortion. By having a third of your EQ system be before the clipping stage and the other 2/3 being a kind of post-emphasis, more of almost a studio tool, you could think of it as kind of finishing your sound, adding sparkle, adding clarity, tightening or bolstering the low end, you end up with a really flexible set of EQ controls in here and a very flexible overall distortion unit. And it's worth noting that nothing in here sounds comical, in my opinion. I don't think that sending the highs or the lows or that mid-range to 0 or to 10 creates anything that would ever be considered an unusable sound. Everything in here feels very tailored, very careful, and very methodical in the way the sounds kind of come out. And I like that. I love that this feels kind of like a no bad sounds style distortion pedal. And it's funny because I tend to try to use at least 2 guitars on those intro jams. Typically, I will try to make sure that I'm using something with single coils and something with humbuckers or some combination of that to get a wider range of sounds when I'm demoing something. But that EQ system felt robust enough that I got everything I wanted out of the one guitar. And something like this with that sparkle from that treble control, and something like this with that very flexible and versatile pre-emphasis mid-range, I felt like I could get so many different flavors of drive and distortion and just underdrive from my one Jennings guitar, my one humbucker guitar, into a 15-watt Benson amp that is already kind of something that is champing at the bit to overdrive a little bit anyways. So yeah, suffice to say, I'm pretty impressed with this. I think that the engineering that goes into something like the Violet is commendable, and I think the end result speaks for itself. So let's go ahead and plug this thing back into our amplifier and give the Violet a listen. So as always, before we get into our sound samples, let's talk through our signal chain and the context we are working in. I am playing my Jennings Navigator with McNally's Stagger Swagger pickups into the JHS The Violet. We're going to start things off with all knobs at noon. We are running into our amplifier, which is the Benson Monarch Plus, into the Universal Audio aux box for cabinets. We're running into a pair of Meris 440 preamps, and then mixing and recording in Luna. There will be no additional post-processing on the guitar except for an LA3A compressor, just so that we don't kind of blow out eardrums or clip. This is our clean tone. Because this thing is, at its core, a distortion pedal, let's go ahead and start things off with knobs at noon for kind of like full hard clipping distortion, the kind of setting where you can't really clean this thing up. But then we'll drop down to at and slightly below 9 a.m. or 9 o'clock on the drive control, because you'll hear how this thing is very touch responsive and much more of a like warm, organic sounding overdrive. So obviously at these settings, even kind of like trying to like roll back your like playing dynamics, you're still in a very kind of clipping place, rolling back your volume. You can almost get to a place of cleanliness again. However, some of my favorite sweet spots in this drive are taking that gain down really low like this and then playing with that pre-emphasis mid-range and that post-emphasis low-high band and fine-tuning really amazing kind of overdrive sounds that really clip into distortion very quickly. Especially because this is the range where you can get access to really excellent edge of breakup sounds. So like if we take the drive back out and compare it to our like actual clean tone. And pretty much from that 9 o'clock point onward, you are living in much more quickly and much more excitably overdriven sounds. And north of noon, things get properly hairy and chaotic. So let's take that gain range back down to something a little bit more kind of on that kind of like blurred line between distortion and overdrive. Something very touch responsive. And let's go ahead and take a look at those low and high controls for adding, especially in the context of these very like wide rangey style pickups, clarity and definition respectively. And let's go ahead and take a look at that mid-range control. As we discussed earlier, this is pre-emphasis and post-emphasis. And in case you skipped over the talking portion of the video, what that means is these are EQs that are applied after the gain stage, and the mid-range is controlled and applied ahead of the gain stage, which means you can use this to reduce or increase the amount of mid-range frequencies hitting the clipping circuits in this thing, which can basically allow you to get more gain and more drive in a more focused way, or to kind of back that off for a warmer, wider, mid-scooped sound. as you can hear, by scooping out those mids, we get actually less gain from our current gain setting right there. So yeah, you can hear that. The more you push those mids or the more you scoop those mids, the more or less of your signal is hitting the device, or the clipping stage itself. And what's cool about that is it can give you access to some very kind of like, what at the time, what 10 years ago or 20 years ago would have been called a very modern sound, that kind of mid-scooped, lots of lows, lots of highs, with some mid-range cut out. And the cool thing about having a mid-level and a mid-frequency focus is if you're doing that kind of scooped rhythm guitar thing like we just did, which has a lot of value when recording rhythm guitars for records, you can decide if you want to cut low mids to reduce the kind of like body of your rhythm parts. Or reduce higher mids to kind of reduce presence or nose. Conversely, you can also use this to drive more gain into the clipping circuit here, and that can be used to decide where you want to put the emphasis in that mid presence, that mid bump, giving you access to things like blues breaker style circuits, or even Tube Screamer or Noble's ODR1 style sounds by pushing through the right mid frequencies. And the nice thing is that can be very subtle or very exaggerated. So you can take it back to like a pretty flat place. And then emphasize that for like leads that really sit on top of a mix. And of course, within the context of all of that, you can always find that exact right. Whether it's really angular and mid-forward and nosy, or whether it's something a little bit warmer like we have dialed in right now, you then, of course, have the ability to fine-tune all of that with your volume. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. I would love to know what you thought of the Violet. Is that kind of split 3-band EQ system something that you would love to see adopted more widely in the industry? Is a 3-band EQ preferable to you over a single tone control or a 2-band EQ? Once again, if you made it to this point in the video, I would love to hear from you in those comments because it shows that you've got some patience, and I appreciate that. So thank you for watching, and until next time.